He was the most feared man in Seoul, a ghost in a silk suit, a predator wrapped in calm, and he never flinched at anything. But when the bleeding boy crashed into his arms on a rain-soaked alley in Itaewon, something cracked open behind Im chest that no bullet had ever reached, a recognition so deep and so ancient it felt like his own blood crying out to him. He didn't know the boy's name, didn't know his mother's face had haunted every dark corner of the last 7 years, but fate had just placed the one secret that could destroy him and the one love he'd buried alive, directly into his hands. Welcome to Afrokorea TV. Please like, share, and subscribe. The Boy in the Rain. The rain came down like a verdict. Im stood outside the black-windowed restaurant in Itaewon, his charcoal suit untouched by the downpour because his men held a canopy above him without being asked. That was the kind of authority he carried. It didn't demand. It simply existed, the way gravity existed, the way night swallowed day. At 34, he was a monument of controlled violence. Broad shoulders that had carried impossible weight, hands that had signed death warrants and boardroom contracts with equal steadiness, a jaw carved from something colder than stone. His eyes, dark, still, dangerously observant, watched the alley across the street the way a wolf watches a tree line. He was waiting for Park Dae-sung, a mid-level distributor who had been skimming from 3 of his operations. The meeting was supposed to be quiet, professional, efficient. It was none of those things. Because before Park Dae-sung's car even rounded the corner, a small body came hurtling out of the darkness, a child, no older than 6 or 7, stumbling on short legs, gasping, his face streaked with rain and something darker. Blood. A gash above his brow, small hands clutching his side, sneakers slapping the wet pavement in a frantic rhythm that spoke of pursuit and terror. The boy didn't see the men. He saw only the gap between them and launched himself directly into Im chest. Every man in Woo-jin's detail reached for a weapon. Stand down. 2 words, barely above the rain. But they stopped 6 trained killers cold. Woo-jin caught the boy without thinking, instinct so deep it bypassed calculation entirely, his large hands closing around small shoulders, and the boy pressed his face into the expensive lapel of that charcoal suit and sobbed, breathless and shaking, the way only a truly frightened child could sob. Not performing fear. Living inside it. Hey. Woo-jin's voice dropped to something none of his men had ever heard from him. Quiet. Careful. Almost gentle. Hey. You're okay. I have you. He crouched without letting the boy go, bringing himself to eye level, and that was when he saw the face fully for the first time. The world tilted. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. The ground actually seemed to shift beneath Woo-jin's custom Italian shoes, and something moved behind his sternum, something tectonic, ancient, the grinding of plates that hadn't moved in 7 years. The boy looked up at him through wet lashes, and his eyes, dark, deep-set, piercing, framed by brows that pulled together in distress, were familiar in a way that bypassed logic entirely and struck something in the bone. He had Woo-jin's brows. The jawline was softer, childish, but the architecture was there. And the nose, his nose, slightly wider at the tip than typical, the same nose his mother had always kissed and called her favorite feature on him. No. What's your name? Woo-jin asked, and his voice did not shake, because Woo-jin's voice never shook. But his hands, hidden in the fold of the boy's jacket, tightened almost imperceptibly. The boy hiccuped, looked at him with enormous, suspicious eyes that despite everything held a spark of defiance, of assessment, of intelligence beyond his years. Jay, the boy said. Jay what? A pause. Then, quietly, J1. My mama calls me that. What's your full name, J1? The boy's chin lifted slightly, that stubborn angle, that exact stubborn angle, and something in Woo-jin's chest cracked like ice in spring. Halen said I shouldn't tell strangers. Halen. The name hit him like a blade between the ribs, clean, precise, devastating. 7 years. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in 7 years. Had buried it the way you bury something you cannot afford to grieve and still function. had built an empire over the grave of it and called the numbness ambition. "Your mama's name is Halen?" he asked, and even he could hear the change in his voice. The careful control under strain. The boy studied him with those ancient, familiar eyes. Then he nodded once. Behind them, tires screamed on wet asphalt. 3 men emerged from a black van, not Woo Jin's men, different posture, different energy, the sloppy urgency of hired muscle rather than trained soldiers. They were coming for the boy. Woo Jin stood slowly. He passed the boy to his second-in-command, Young Min-ho, without turning around. "Get him inside. Clean the cut. Don't let him out of your sight. Boss."
Now.
Then Woo Jin turned to face the men coming through the rain, and the look on his face made 2 of the 3 stop walking. The third kept coming. Only once. What the blood remembers. Later that night, after the situation had been handled in the quiet and permanent way that Woo Jin handled things, the boy sat in the back booth of the restaurant with a butterfly bandage above his brow and a bowl of jjajangmyeon that Min-ho had produced from somewhere, eating with the focused seriousness of a child who had learned not to waste food. Woo Jin sat across from him. He'd changed his shirt, the charcoal one now ruined, and was in his shirt sleeves, watching the boy eat. His men hovered at careful distances, exchanging glances they thought their boss couldn't see. He could always see. "Where do you live?" Woo Jin asked when the bowl was half empty. "Near the market," Jae-won said without looking up. "The one with the orange awning." "Mapo district?" A nod. Another spoonful. "Does your mother know where you are?" The boy's spoon slowed. He looked up, and for a moment his face did something complicated. Guilt and worry and love all tangled together, and it was so achingly recognizable that Woo Jin had to look at the table. "I was following the cat," Jae-won admitted quietly. "Mama doesn't know. We'll call her." "I don't know the number. Mama carries the phone." Woo Jin exhaled slowly through his nose. "How old are you?" 6.5. The half is important. Something moved through Woo Jin's chest, something unwilling and unbearable and completely outside his control. 6.5, which meant the boy would have been conceived 7 years ago, give or take. 7 years ago, Woo Jin had been engaged to Halen Adiz Okafor, a Nigerian-British graduate student in Seoul on a research fellowship who had laughed too loudly at his terrible jokes and called him on every manipulation and made him feel, for the first and only time in his adult life, like a person rather than a weapon. 7 years ago, his father had sat across from him in this very district and laid out, with clinical precision, exactly what would happen to Halen if Woo Jin didn't end things and send her away. What the Im family could do to a woman with no connections in Korea, no protection, no leverage. His father hadn't threatened in anger. He'd explained in the same calm voice a doctor uses to describe a terminal diagnosis. Woo Jin had ended the engagement the next morning, had been cold, deliberate, cruel in the specific way that ensured she would not try to come back. Had watched her face close like a door being shut from the inside, and told himself it was the kindest violence he'd ever done. He had not known she was pregnant. He was almost certain of it now, sitting across from his own eyes in a 6-year-old face, and the knowledge was reorganizing everything inside him, tearing down walls and rebuilding them in configurations he didn't recognize. "My men will take you home," he said. Jae-won looked up. "Are you the police?"
No.
"Are you a bad man?" Woo Jin looked at the boy for a long moment. "Some people think so." Jae-won considered this, with the gravity of a small philosopher. "Mama says real bad men don't ask if you're okay." "You asked." Woo Jin said nothing, but something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, almost in the direction of warmth. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Woo Jin." "That's a good name," Jae-won said, as if he were qualified to judge. Then he went back to his noodles, and Woo Jin sat in the noise of everything realigning and tried to remember how to breathe. The drive to Mapo district took 20 minutes. Woo Jin sat in the lead car, another departure from protocol, one his men catalogued silently, watching the streets scroll past. He had his people running Halen's name through every database that could be accessed without a government order. By the time they reached the market with the orange awning, Min-ho was reading him results from the passenger seat. Halen Adiz Okafor. Nigerian national, British passport, Korean work visa renewed twice. Employed as a translator and cultural consultant at the Mapo Community Center. Single mother. One dependent, male, age 6. One dependent,
Male.
age 6. Address? Minho gave it. 3rd floor, the yellow building 2 streets from the market. Woo Jin got out of the car. Boss, you should let us. Wait here. He walked the boy to the building himself, his hand loose at the child's shoulder, not gripping, not guiding, just present. And when they reached the 3rd floor and the door at the end of the hall, he stood back while Jaewon knocked. The door flew open almost immediately. And there she was. 7 years had passed. 7 years of distance and deliberate forgetting and building an empire brick by brick over the hole she'd left. And she was standing in a yellow-lit doorway in an oversized sweater and worn leggings, her face streaked with tears. She'd clearly been crying for the last 2 hours, her hair pulled back in a loose bun with several strands escaped, and she was more beautiful than anything he had allowed himself to remember. She grabbed Jaewon and pulled him into her arms in one motion, pressing her face into his hair, and the sound she made, relief and anger and love all compressed into a single exhale, made Woo Jin's chest do something structural and dangerous. Jaewon Okafor, you have 30 seconds to explain yourself before I... She looked up and saw him. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds and felt like 40 years. Halen Adiz Okafor stood upright slowly, one hand still holding her son to her side, her eyes, large, dark, dangerously intelligent, fringed with lashes that were currently wet with tears, moving across Woo Jin's face with an expression that went through shock, confusion, and landed somewhere between volcanic fury and white-knuckled terror.
No, she said.
One word, barely a whisper. Halen. No. Louder now. Her hand moved to push Jaewon gently behind her, the automatic protectiveness of a woman who had been protecting someone alone for 6 years. How did you? He ran into me, Woo Jin said. Some men were chasing him. I brought him home. Her eyes dropped to the bandage above Jaewon's brow, and something moved across her face that was too complex to name. Thank you, she said, in the voice of someone delivering the words through broken glass. You can go now. Halen. I said thank you. That's everything you're getting from me. Her eyes came back to his, and what was in them was not the softness he'd spent 7 years trying not to miss. It was armor. Forged in those 7 years, every sleepless night and impossible decision, every time she'd looked at Jaewon's face and seen the man who'd left her and made herself get up anyway. Good night, Woo Jin. She reached for the door. His hand came up, not touching her, just rising, an involuntary reflex, and then dropped. I'll have someone watching the building, he said, until I know who those men were. I don't want your... It's not for you. His eyes moved, briefly, unmistakably, to Jaewon's face where the boy peered around his mother's arm. It's just what I'm doing. Then he turned and walked back down the hall, and did not allow himself to look back, even when he heard the door close, even when he heard the click of the lock, even when something in his chest pulled like a wound reopening after years of scar tissue. Behind him, muffled by the door, he heard a small voice say, Mama, do you know that man? And Halen's answer, so quiet he almost didn't catch it. A long time ago, baby. A long time ago. 7 years of silence. The next morning, Woo Jin sat at the head of the conference table in the Ambw Group's 42nd floor offices and did not hear a word of the 40-minute briefing his operations director delivered. He was looking at a photograph. Not conspicuously, it was on his phone, beneath the table, a photo his surveillance team had pulled from Halen's social media profile. Public account. Community center events, a cookbook she apparently contributed to, photos of Mapo's street markets, and the small, beautiful, ordinary life she had built in the city where they'd met. And in almost every photo, somewhere, there was Jaewon, at her side, on her back, reaching for something just outside frame, and the boy's presence in each image was like a gravitational force, pulling everything around him into orbit. Boss. Woo Jin set down the phone. Continue. Minho exchanged a look with the operations director. Neither spoke. I said continue. The Champa situation resolved overnight, Minho said carefully. The 3 men from the alley, freelance, hired through a Gangnam broker. Someone paid to grab the boy. Woojin's stillness intensified, which in him was the equivalent of anyone else slamming a fist on the table. Who hired the broker? We're working on it. Could be connected to Park Daesung. Possible he found out about last night's meeting and wanted leverage. Or it could be a warning for the mother, another man offered. Woojin's eyes moved to him with the precision of a scope finding a target. What do you know about the mother? Nothing yet, boss. We can find everything. Quietly. I want to know who she knows, who might want to use a child against her, and I want it done before noon. He stood, buttoning his jacket with a controlled precision that meant the meeting was over. No one touches that building without my knowledge. 2 men on rotation. Civilian clothes. Should we tell her she's under protection? Woojin picked up his phone. She already told me she doesn't want my protection, which means she doesn't need to know she has it. He walked out. That same morning, 3 floors below street level, Halen sat at her desk at the community center and stared at the same paragraph of a translation brief she'd been staring at for 40 minutes. Jaewon was at school. She'd walked him herself, watched until he was through the gates, then sat on a bench outside for 10 minutes with her hands in her lap and her heart performing acrobatics she hadn't authorized. In Woojin, she had spent 6 years, 6 years of diapers and sleepless nights and budget spreadsheets and loving a child with everything she had, carefully, deliberately, architecturally not thinking about Im Woojin. She had built her life around the fact of his absence the way you build a house around a load-bearing wall. You account for it, you compensate for it, you never touch it because touching it risks everything. And then he had appeared in her doorway with her son, and that same face, the one she'd tried to replace with busyness and purpose and the bright, uncomplicated love of a child, and every wall she'd built had shuddered. He hadn't known about Jaewon. She was almost certain of it. The look on his face when he glanced at her son had been too unguarded for a man usually made of guard. A fracture in the stone, a flash of something so raw it had taken her breath away before she'd armored herself back up and shut the door. She hadn't told him. When he'd ended the engagement 7 years ago, cold and clean and so deliberately cruel she'd almost admired the efficiency of it, she'd been 2 weeks pregnant and hadn't known yet. By the time she'd found out, she'd been on a plane back to Lagos, and the idea of going back, of handing him that vulnerability, of letting him look at her with those flat eyes and tell her it still didn't matter. She had never gone back. She had come to Seoul again 2 years later, for a job offer too good to refuse, and had told herself it was a big city and the odds of running into him were. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 full rings. Hello. You need new locks. Im Woojin's voice, low and unhurried, filled the phone like smoke filling a room. The ones on your building door open with a standard pick in about 8 seconds. I had someone check. She pulled the phone from her ear and looked at it as if it had personally betrayed her. How did you get this number? She asked when she put it back. Halen. That's not an answer. You need new locks. I'll have someone install them today. You will not have someone, she stopped. Breathed. Used the voice she used when Jaewon was doing something infuriating and she needed to model patience. Im Woojin. I am going to say this once clearly so that there is no misunderstanding. I do not want your help. I do not want your protection. I do not want your men watching my building or replacing my locks or whatever else it is you've apparently already done. What happened last night was, I'm grateful for Jaewon, but that is the end of it. That is all this is. A pause. The men who chased him, he said. You don't want to know who sent them? Her hand tightened on the phone. I already have someone looking into it, she said. Who? Someone. Halen. His voice dropped half a register, and even through a phone, even through 7 years of armor, it did something to the architecture of her composure. I'm better resourced than someone. Let me find out. And what do you want in return? The silence that followed was just long enough to be meaningful. To know he's safe, he said. And the simplicity of it, the bare, unperformed sincerity of it, cracked something small in the wall she'd spent the whole morning reinforcing. "I'll call you if something comes up," she said, and hung up. She sat for a moment with the phone in her lap, staring at the translation brief she still hadn't read. Then she picked up her pen and got back to work because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. She had built a life from the rubble of a broken engagement with nothing but her own will and the small warm weight of a boy who deserved the world. She was not going to let him Woojin walk back in and change the load-bearing structure. She was not.
Proximity.
A few days later, Woojin's intelligence confirmed what he already knew. The broker who'd hired the men to grab Jaewon had been contracted by a mid-level broker working for Han Song-il, a Gangnam-based rival who had been quietly building pressure on the western districts of Woojin's territory for the past year. Han didn't know about Jaewon specifically. The boy had apparently been collateral, wrong place, wrong alley, caught in the outer ring of a message meant for a different target. It was both a relief and a fresh source of fury, because it meant the threat to Jaewon had been incidental rather than directed, but it also meant Halen and her son were living one wrong place, wrong time moment away from someone deciding they were useful leverage. Woojin increased the detail on their building to 4 men without telling her. Then, because it was insufficiently efficient to protect someone from a distance when you could gather better intelligence at close range, that was the reason he gave himself, and it was only partially a lie. He appeared at the community center on a Thursday afternoon. Halen looked up from behind the reception desk and went very still. She was wearing a wrap dress in deep burgundy that did extraordinary things to the lines of her figure, her hair out today in a natural cloud that framed her face, and for one unprofessional moment Woojin forgot what he had meant to say. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Donation." He set a folder on the desk. "The Ambw Group is funding 3 community center expansion programs in Mapo this quarter." Her eyes went to the folder, then back to him.
Slowly.
"You're donating to my workplace. To the community. The center happens to be the implementing organization." Woojin. It was already planned. A technical truth. He had told Minho to plan it approximately 36 hours ago. She opened the folder, scanned the figures, and something complicated moved across her face. "This is a significant amount," she said. "The center does significant work. Did you even look up what we do before you? Youth literacy program, cross-cultural integration workshops, after-school tutoring, domestic support services for foreign nationals." He held her gaze steadily. "I looked it up." She closed the folder, set it carefully on the desk. Then she looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't fully decode, something between wariness and a reluctant recognition of something she didn't want to acknowledge. "The programs will genuinely help people," she said finally. "Good. You're still not allowed to use this as a reason to come here. Donors typically have site visit rights." Her eyes narrowed. And then, just for a fraction of a second, there it was, the ghost of a smile, suppressed immediately, weaponized back into a flat line, but he'd seen it. He had spent an inordinate amount of his formative years studying that face, and he hadn't forgotten the vocabulary of it. "Once," she said. "One site visit. Scheduled. Professional. Of course. And you're not meeting Jaewon." The name landed in the space between them with its full weight. "Halen." "Not yet." Her voice didn't waver, but her hands, folded on the desk, pressed together slightly harder. "I need you to understand something. Whatever you think you saw in his face, whatever you're calculating right now behind those eyes, that is a child. He is my child. And he doesn't know, and I am not going to have that conversation in the middle of whatever this is. So, if you want to donate, donate. If you want to find out who sent those men, I'll accept that help. But that boundary stands until I say otherwise. Are we clear?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Clear," he said. He walked to the door. Stopped. "He told me his mama says real bad men don't ask if you're okay," he said, not turning around. Behind him, the silence stretched and held. "He talks too much," Halen said softly. "He's extraordinary," Woojin said, and walked out. The site visit happened the following Tuesday. Halen gave it herself, because no one else was available, which was what she told herself, and what was only partially true. She walked him through the literacy program and the integration workshops with the brisk competence of someone who knew her work deeply and was using professionalism as a force field. He asked intelligent questions. He had clearly done more research. He spoke to one of the workshop facilitators in Yoruba, badly, charmingly badly, but genuinely trying, and the facilitator laughed delightedly and corrected him, and Halen watched from 6 feet away and felt the force field flex slightly. He was doing it on purpose. She knew he was doing it on purpose. Ambw had never done anything that wasn't deliberate. But deliberate didn't mean it wasn't real. Stop, she told herself. At the end of the tour, they stood in the small courtyard outside, and the afternoon light was warm and golden, and Seoul smelled like autumn street food and old stone, and he was looking at her with that look, the one she remembered, the one she had spent years trying to convince herself she'd misread, that stillness in him that felt less like distance and more like a man restraining himself from something enormous. "You built this life very well," he said. She looked at him, surprised by the directness of it. "I had to," she said simply. Something moved in his face. "I know." "Do you?" Not quite a question. Not quite an accusation. "I know it's not enough to say he stopped. Started again. "There are things I need to explain. When you're ready to hear them. No pressure. Just when you're ready." "I'm not ready," she said immediately. "I know." He held her gaze. "I'll wait." And the problem, the entire catastrophic problem, was that she believed him. What jealousy looks like in a silk suit. The following week, Woo-jin was informed by his surveillance team that a man named David Asante, Ghanaian Korean, lawyer, 32, handsome in an easy, uncomplicated way, had brought Halen lunch at the community center twice in 4 days. He received this information in the middle of a meeting with 6 department heads. He read the message on his phone twice. Looked up. "Continue," he said. The meeting continued. He heard approximately nothing. Twice in 4 days. He pulled David Asante's profile before the meeting ended. Attorney at a mid-sized firm in Mapo. Well-reviewed, no criminal record. Volunteer board member at 2 nonprofits. Photos showed a man who smiled easily and had the kind of relaxed confidence that came from never having had to fight for anything. Woo-jin closed the profile. He was not jealous. He did not experience jealousy. Jealousy implied an entitlement he had no current claim to, and Woo-jin was a precise man who did not feel things he had no claim to. He was at the community center by 2 o'clock. Halen was in the courtyard with David Asante, both of them eating from takeout containers, his hand occasionally touching her forearm in the easy way of someone comfortable with that liberty. She was laughing at something he said, not the ghost smile she'd given Woo-jin, the suppressed one, but a full one, open and warm and unguarded. Woo-jin stopped in the doorway. Then he walked out there with exactly the energy of someone who had every professional right to be there, which, technically, he did. Halen saw him first. The laugh faded, not extinguished, just rerouted, and something shifted in her posture. David noticed, turned, assessed the situation with the quick read of a man who dealt in conflict professionally. "Woo-jin," he said pleasantly. "David Asante. I've heard of your foundation work." "Likewise," Woo-jin said, which was true now that he'd pulled the man's full profile. He looked at Halen. "I have a question about the expansion program timeline. When you have a moment." "I'm on my lunch break," she said, with a particular precision. "Of course. I'll wait inside." He went inside. He stood by the window that overlooked the courtyard, because there were forms on the windowsill that required reviewing, and reviewed them while the 2 of them below wrapped up their lunch, and David Asante touched Halen's shoulder when he said goodbye. Minho appeared at Woo-jin's elbow. "You followed me here?" Woo-jin said, without looking up from the forms. "I always follow you. That's the job." A beat. "You're going to put a hole through that paper if you hold it any tighter." Woo-jin set the paper down, looked out the window. "He's not right for her," he said. "You don't know anything about him." "I know everything about him. He's had 2 parking violations, and he was treasurer of his law school's social committee." A pause. "He's not right for her." Minho was quiet for a moment. Then, "Boss, you broke her engagement and sent her away 7 years ago." She's been raising her son alone for 6 of those years, by the looks of it. And you're standing in a window watching her eat lunch with another man like you have any. Minho. Sir. I'm aware of the situation. I'm just saying that maybe the problem isn't him. Woo Jin turned from the window. I'm aware of that too. He smoothed his jacket, picked up the forms again, and went to find an office to wait in, because standing at windows was inefficient and he had paperwork. When Helen found him in the small borrowed office 20 minutes later, she closed the door, crossed her arms, and looked at him. You didn't actually have a question about the timeline, she said. I had several. Woo Jin. He looked up from the desk, and the directness of his gaze, no pretense, no deflection, just him looking at her steadily from across the desk, was so characteristic that it made something in her chest pull. Who is David Asani to you? He asked. She blinked. Excuse me? You don't owe me an answer. I'm asking. You are absolutely right that I don't owe you. I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm walking back into. Or, if I've already missed, he stopped.
Pressed the heel of his hand to the desk.
I need to know. The vulnerability in it, the careful, controlled, almost mortifying vulnerability of a man who clearly did not do vulnerable, landed on her like something unexpected. She uncrossed her arms.
He's a friend, she said.
He helps with legal questions at the center. He's kind and uncomplicated, and he's never once made me feel like I'm standing at the edge of something I might fall off. Woo Jin held her gaze. And me? She looked at him for a long moment. You've always made me feel like I'm standing at the edge of something, she said quietly. That was the whole problem. She left the office before he could respond. But at the door, her hand on the handle, she paused. The lock on my door, she said without turning around. It was replaced 3 days ago. Brand new hardware. My landlord said it was compliments of a building services program he'd never heard of. Silence. Jaewon noticed it had flowers on it, she added, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite as armored as it had been all month. He said it was pretty. He has opinions about everything. He sounds like his mother, Woo Jin said. She left. But the lock had flowers on it because he'd told the installer to find hardware that looked like something a child would like. He didn't know how she knew that he knew that. He thought, maybe, that she had always been able to read him better than anyone, and that this fact had always terrified and anchored him in equal measure. The days that followed moved like weather, slow, and then suddenly, all at once, the confirmation came on a Wednesday. Woo Jin was in his private office on the 42nd floor when Minho set the envelope on the desk. Not a digital file. A physical envelope, sealed, the kind used for things that required paper trails to be managed carefully. Woo Jin looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. Inside was a single document. 2 columns of genetic markers. A probability figure at the bottom that occupied the entire lower third of the page in bold type. 99.97%. He set the paper down. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, souls spread in every direction. His city, the city his family had controlled through money and fear and the careful management of violence for 3 generations. He had inherited an empire at 26 when his father's health collapsed, had grown it, sharpened it, made it something even his father hadn't imagined. He had done it by never losing control of a situation, by always knowing the variables before anyone else did and positioning himself accordingly. He had not known this variable. He had a son, the boy with his brows and his nose, and that stubborn chin lift that Woo Jin recognized from every mirror he'd ever stood in front of. That boy was his. Had been his for 6.5 years. Had been existing in the world, learning to walk and talk and follow cats into dark alleys and make opinions about decorative hardware, and Woo Jin had not known. He sat with this for exactly 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and told Minho to clear his afternoon. All of it. Minho asked. All of it. He drove to the community center himself. No driver. No detail. Just him and the Wednesday afternoon traffic and the document on the passenger seat and 6 years of absence pressing against the inside of his chest like something that needed to be let out before it broke, something structural. Halen was in a meeting when he arrived. The receptionist, a young woman who had learned over the past 2 weeks that Ambw did not wait in lobbies, opened the meeting room door and told her she had a visitor. Halen came out looking brisk and slightly annoyed, and then saw his face and stopped. Whatever she saw there made the annoyance dissolve into something more careful. "Come in here," she said quietly, and led him into the small borrowed office they'd used before. He placed the document on the desk between them, watched her look at it, watched her face go through 5 different things in 4 seconds: recognition, something almost like relief, and then a complicated, layered grief. "How did you?" she started. His blood type was on the hospital intake form from the night in the alley. "I had a lab," he stopped. Looked at the wall. Looked back at her. "I needed to be sure. Before I said anything. You could have asked me," she said softly. "You would have told me it was none of my business." A pause. She didn't deny it. "Would you have told me?" he asked. "Eventually. If none of this had happened, if we'd never run into each other, would you have told me?" The silence stretched. "I don't know," she said, and he believed her, because Halen had never been a woman who gave comfortable lies when uncomfortable truth was more accurate. "I thought about it. Every year I thought about it. But I also thought about what it would mean bringing you into his life, into our life. And I was scared, Woo-jin. I was scared of what you'd do with that kind of leverage over me. After the way you ended things." "Leverage," he repeated, and something in the word wounded him in ways he hadn't known he was still capable of being wounded. "That's the world you live in." She met his eyes steadily. "Everything is leverage. Everyone has a use. I wasn't going to make my son a chess piece. He would never have been. How was I supposed to know that?" Her voice didn't rise, but the weight in it was enormous. "You looked at me like I was nothing when you ended it. Like 7 months of, like everything we'd been, was just something to be discarded when it became inconvenient. I was pregnant and terrified and heartbroken on a plane back to Lagos, and I made a decision. I'm not going to apologize for it." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm asking you to understand that I need to be part of his life. Whatever that looks like. Whatever you're comfortable with. But I'm not. I can't be." He pressed a fist against the desk, barely, just enough to feel the pressure. "He's mine, Halen. And I missed 6 years. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I don't even know yet how to forgive myself for the choices that led to it. But I'm asking for the chance to be his father." The word father fell between them like something fragile and enormous. Halen looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "He knows his father isn't around," she said quietly. "I've always been honest with him, as honest as a 6-year-old can handle. He's asked questions. I've told him his father lived far away and didn't know about him."
A breath.
"He doesn't hate you. He doesn't know you well enough to hate you. He wants a dad. He's wanted one for a while." Something in Woo-jin's face fractured, just at the edges. "I want to tell him," he said. "Not yet. Not until I know this isn't going to blow up in his face." She folded her hands on the desk. "You can come to the park on Saturday. I take him every week. You can be there. Not as his father, just as the man who helped him that night. Let him get comfortable. Let me watch how you are with him." "An audition," he said. "A test," she said. "Because he is the most important person in my life, and I am not going to let anyone, not even you, walk into his world and disrupt it without being certain they're going to stay." He held her gaze. "I'm going to stay," he said. "I need you to understand that. Whatever I have to do, however long it takes, I'm staying." She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. "Saturday," she said. 3 o'clock. Han River Park, the South Entrance. He picked up the document. Put it back in the envelope. "Saturday," he said. "The park, the boy, and the beginning." Saturday came with thin autumn sunshine and a cold edge that turned breath to mist. Woo-jin arrived at the south entrance of Han River Park at 2:53 and stood by the railing watching the water, his coat dark against the pale sky, looking for all the world like a man who came to this park regularly and not like a man who had not slept properly in 4 days and was experiencing something that felt terrifyingly close to stage fright. He heard them before he saw them. Jaewon's voice carried, bright and running commentary, and full of observations about everything. And then they came around the path bend, the boy in a red jacket and small yellow boots that were impractical for the weather and perfect for jumping in puddles, which he was demonstrating on every puddle they passed. Halen walked beside him in her rust-colored coat, her hand loosely available in case he needed it, watching him with that particular expression, warm and exasperated and wholly devoted, that Woojin had been carrying around in his chest like a photograph for 2 weeks. Jae-won spotted him first.
The boy stopped, tilted his head.
Then, it's the man from the rain. Jae. But he was already running. Woojin braced instinctively and caught the boy by the shoulders before he could crash into him at full sprint, crouching to his level with an ease that surprised him. He hadn't known his body knew how to do that. Apparently it did. "You're here," Jae-won said, with the accusatory delight of someone catching someone else in a pleasant surprise. "Mama, he's here." "I see that," Halen said, arriving at a more dignified pace, her eyes on Woojin with careful watchfulness. "Did you come to see the ducks?" Jae-won demanded. "There are ducks. I named them. The big one is General Kim, and the small one is his secretary." "Why the secretary?" Woojin asked. "Because he follows General Kim everywhere and looks very busy, but doesn't actually do anything." Woojin looked up at Halen with an expression he couldn't quite control. She pressed her lips together against something. "That is very observant," Woojin said. "Mama says I notice things," Jae-won confirmed, without any false modesty. "Can you come see the ducks? General Kim is very impressive. I think you would get along." Jae-won, "Mr. might have other." "I have no other plans," Woojin said, standing. Jae-won grabbed his hand. Not asked. Not negotiated. Just reached up and wrapped small fingers around 2 of Woojin's and started walking, pulling him toward the duck section of the river with the absolute confidence of a child who had decided an adult was trustworthy and was now deploying that trust immediately and completely. Woojin looked down at the small hand in his. Then he looked at Halen, who was watching him with an expression that had gone very quiet, like a woman recalibrating something important. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They walked to the ducks. Later that afternoon, Jae-won fell asleep on a park bench between them, exhausted by a spirited debate with General Kim, 2 rounds on the climbing structure, and 3 slices of the hotteok Woojin had bought from a cart despite Halen saying the sugar before dinner was a terrible idea, his head tipped sideways, his red jacket tucked up around his chin, his breathing slow and even. The silence that descended between the adults was a different quality of silence than they'd shared before.
Softer.
More complicated. "He warmed up to you fast," Halen said quietly. "Is that bad?" She looked at the sleeping boy for a moment. "It means he already trusts you." "From the alley. He told me afterward. Mama, that man held me like I was important." She said it without looking at Woojin. Those exact words. 6 years old. Woojin looked at Jae-won's sleeping face. At the brow he recognized. The jawline he recognized. The absolute peaceful trustingness of a child who had decided, without the benefit of information he didn't have, that the world was safe enough in this moment to sleep in. "Halen." His voice was low, careful. "When I ended things, I need to tell you why. Not to excuse it. Just, you deserve to know what actually happened." She was very still. "My father," he said. "He made it clear what would happen to you if I didn't end it. Specifically, he had people who could make a foreign national's life in Korea or anywhere very complicated, very dangerous." He looked at the river. "I told myself it was protection, that the most protective thing I could do was make you hate me enough to leave and never come back." The silence held for a long time. "You could have told me," she said finally. "You would have stayed and fought it," he said. "You would have stood in front of it. That's who you are. Maybe I had a right to make that choice." "You did. I took it from you." He met her eyes. "I know. I've known for 7 years. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Halen. I needed you to know that walking away from you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and that I did it wrong, and that I've carried that." She looked at him for a long, searching moment. "Your father," she said. "Does he still?" "He died 3 years ago." A pause. The empire is mine now. Fully. There's no one who can threaten you the way he could. She absorbed this. I'm not the same person I was 7 years ago, she said quietly. Neither am I. Another silence. Jaewon shifted slightly in sleep, and Woo Jin's hand moved automatically, covered the edge of the jacket that had slipped, and Halen watched his hand do it with an expression that was too careful to be neutral. I'm not ready to trust you, she said. Not fully. Not yet. I know. But she stopped. Started again. He deserves to know his father. If you're really committed to staying, then we can try.
Slowly. Carefully.
With 1,000 conditions. Name them, he said. All of them. And for the first time in 7 years, the wall between them wasn't a wall so much as a door. Still closed. Still guarded. But with a door handle on both sides, when danger has a name. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, things were not simple. Nothing about this was simple, but they were building something. Jaewon now called him Woo Jin SSI with enormous seriousness, having decided that formality was appropriate for impressive adults. He had informed Woo Jin of this distinction solemnly during their second park visit, and Woo Jin had accepted it with matching gravity. They had a Saturday routine now.
Park. Food.
Sometimes a museum or the aquarium, which Jaewon approached with the intensity of a small scientist cataloging the world. Woo Jin showed up and was present and did not try to buy the boy's affection, had resisted every impulse to show up with armfuls of gifts, understanding instinctively that what Jaewon needed was not things but time, and Halen watched this restraint with something that kept shifting the architecture of her resistance. He also showed up at the community center. For legitimate reasons, mostly. The expansion programs were genuinely underway and required oversight, and Halen had accepted this with professional composure, though he noticed she had positioned her desk so that she could see the entrance from it. He noticed she noticed when he arrived. He said nothing about this. Then on a Thursday, everything shifted. Woo Jin was in a meeting when Minho entered without knocking, which he only did in specific circumstances, and set a phone on the table in front of him showing a live feed from the surveillance camera outside Halen's building.
2 men.
Parked across the street. Same vehicle for 6 hours. Not ours, Minho said. Woo Jin was out of the meeting before Minho finished the sentence. He called Halen from the car. She picked up on the second ring. Where is Jaewon? He asked, and his voice was controlled in the way that controlled things to prevent them from becoming uncontrolled. School. Why, what's? Pick him up.
Right now.
Don't go back to your building. Go directly to the address I'm going to text you. Woo Jin, what's happening? I'll explain everything.
Please.
Just move, Halen.
Now. A beat.
He heard her stand, heard keys jingle. Sending the address, he said, and ended the call. He had already rerouted his car. The address was a safe house, one of 3 he maintained in different districts, all fully serviced, none in his name. It was also, by any measure, the nicest apartment Halen had ever stood in, which she registered and then deliberately chose not to comment on. Jaewon was delighted by it. He found the indoor fish tank within 40 seconds and announced that he was naming them all. He has your ability to compartmentalize, Woo Jin said, watching the boy assign names with focused intensity. He has my survival skills, Halen corrected, sitting down across from him at the dining table. Now explain.
He did.
The surveillance on her building. The vehicle's registration traced back to a shell company connected to Han Song-il's organization. The fact that Han had apparently identified Halen as adjacent to Woo Jin through the donation records at the community center, a leak that Woo Jin had already begun addressing with his characteristic thoroughness. They're watching me to watch you, she said. Yes. Her hands, flat on the table, pressed slightly harder. This is because of you. Because I'm connected to you. Yes, he said, without flinching from it. She looked at him for a long moment. Is Jaewon in danger? Not yet. They're collecting intelligence, not planning action. But I'm not going to wait until they make a move. He leaned forward. I want you both to stay here until I've dealt with Han. This building has security that your current building doesn't have anything even close to, she finished. A pause. How long?
A week.
Maybe 2. She looked at the fish tank, where Jaewon was now conducting what appeared to be a formal introduction ceremony between individual fish. He is cool, she said. I'll have him driven. In one of your cars? He'll think it's the best thing that's ever happened. Is that a yes? She looked back at him. The fear she was carrying was visible if you knew her face, which he did, and it made something protective rear up in him with a ferocity that caught him off guard. One condition, she said. Name it. You sleep in the other wing. The building had 2 wings. And you knock. Always, he said. She exhaled.
Fine.
2 weeks. Then I want my life back. I'll give it back better than I found it, he said. She looked at him for a moment with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was related to one. That is either very reassuring or very alarming, she said. Probably both, he admitted. And this time, she did smile, small, unwilling, real, and looked away before he could catalog it fully. But he had seen it, and he carried it into the evening like something precious and fragile and entirely his. What living together reveals. The first 2 days were careful, professional, both of them navigating the apartment with the deliberate courtesy of people determined not to acknowledge the enormous charged current running beneath every interaction. Jaewon had no such deliberation. He existed in the apartment like a small tornado of comfort, appearing in doorways to announce discoveries, demanding opinions on the fish names, asking Woojin detailed questions about everything from the security monitors to what his job was to whether he could have a dog. I'm working on it, Woojin said to the dog question, without thinking. Halen, who was making tea in the kitchen, went very still. Working on it means yes, Jaewon informed him gravely. That's what Mama says when she means yes, but hasn't said it yet. Jaewon, Halen said. I'm just explaining the system, the boy said. By the 3rd day, the professionalism had begun to erode in small ways that neither of them acknowledged. She made enough coffee for 2 in the morning. He was always awake first, and had the kitchen warm by the time she came downstairs. They moved around each other in the kitchen without collision, settling into a choreography that felt less learned and more remembered, like muscle memory for a dance neither of them had admitted to knowing. On the 4th evening, Jaewon fell asleep during a movie between them on the large couch, sprawled across both their laps with a democratic disregard of a child who had decided the available adults were his and arranged himself accordingly. Neither of them moved. The movie finished. The apartment was quiet. Jaewon's breathing was deep and even. He does this at home, Halen said softly. Falls asleep wherever he is. Never makes it to bed on his own. I used to do that, Woojin said. My mother said I could fall asleep standing up, if the mood struck. She looked at him. The first time she'd looked at him with genuine curiosity, rather than wariness in weeks. Tell me something about your childhood. Something real. He considered. I had a dog. Mongrel, street dog, half my height. I found him in an alley when I was 8 and smuggled him into the house for 3 weeks before my father found out.
A pause.
My father wanted to remove him. My mother told him the dog was staying, and that was the end of the conversation. Halen's expression softened, involuntarily. Your mother sounds formidable. She was the only person my father ever actually listened to. He looked at Jaewon's sleeping face. She would have loved him. Immediately and completely. The silence that followed was warm and sad in equal measure. I'm sorry she didn't get to know him, Halen said. He looked at her, and the simple human kindness of it, her extending sympathy to him about this after everything, made something in him surface that he usually kept deep and sealed. Thank you, he said. They sat in the quiet with a sleeping boy between them, and the distance that had been carefully maintained for weeks was down to inches and felt like nothing at all, like the last pages of a book before the ending, and Halen was looking at the television but her shoulder was pressed against his arm, and neither of them moved away. The 7th night, the situation with Han Somael reached its crisis point. Woojin was on a call in his study at midnight when his second perimeter team reported movement, not the 2 men from before, a larger group, 7 vehicles converging on a location that included this building in the radius. Han had escalated. Whatever intelligence he'd gathered had apparently been enough to make him move from surveillance to action, and the action was coming now. Woojin was off the call and in the hallway in under a minute, knocking on Haelin's door. He always knocked, and when she opened it she was already awake, already reading the tension in his face before he spoke. "We need to move," he said. "Both of you.
Now." She didn't argue.
She was pulling Jae-won from bed and into his coat within 60 seconds, the practiced efficiency of a woman who had trained herself to mobilize quickly, and Woojin found this. The competence of it, the trust inside it, more moving than he expected. They moved through the building's lower exit, into a vehicle that was already running. Woojin gave instructions on his phone in a low, rapid voice as they drove, his hand on the back of the seat, not touching her, but close, a few inches from her shoulder, present. Jae-won, half asleep and bundled in his coat, looked up at Woojin from Haelin's arms. "Are we having an adventure?" he asked. "Yes," Woojin said. "Good," Jae-won said, and went back to sleep. Haelin looked at Woojin over the top of her son's head, and what was in her face in that moment? Gratitude and fear and something older, something she'd been trying to retire for 7 years, made him want to reach for her hand with a wanting so acute it was almost pain. He didn't, but he held her gaze, steady and certain. "I have you," he said without words. She looked away first, but she shifted slightly closer in the seat. By morning, Han Somael's operation had been disrupted. Woojin's people had moved with the precision of 7 years of organizational intelligence, and the threat that had been building for months collapsed in a single night. 3 of Han's key infrastructure nodes were dismantled. The man himself was in the kind of legal and organizational difficulty that would occupy him entirely for the foreseeable future. Woojin sat in an operations room at 5 in the morning, tie loosened, and received the last status reports in silence. Minho handed him coffee. "She and the boy are secure?" Woojin asked. "3rd floor, eastern wing. The boy is still asleep. Ms. Okafor has been awake for the past hour." He went upstairs. She was in the small sitting room adjacent to the room where Jae-won slept, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city come light through the window. She looked at him when he entered, and her eyes took in the tie, the loosened collar, the exhaustion he wouldn't let show anywhere except around her, had never been able to hide it around her. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now." He sat in the chair across from her. "You're safe. Both of you." She exhaled, long and slow, and pulled the blanket slightly tighter. "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "about what would have happened if those men in the alley had gotten to Jae-won before you did. That first night. They didn't. But if they had." She looked at him. "You saved him before you knew who he was.
Before you had any reason to.
You caught him." "He ran into me," Woojin said. "You caught him," she repeated. "And something in the way you held him." She stopped. Swallowed. "I watched you from the door.
For a second before you noticed me.
You were looking at his face like something had broken inside you. Like you recognized something." He said nothing. "Did you know? Even then?" He considered the honest answer. "I didn't know. But something recognized." He looked at his hands. "I've spent enough time building walls around things I can't afford to feel. But I didn't have a wall for that." The silence was very quiet. "Woojin." Her voice was different now. Lower. Less armored. He looked up. "I'm scared," she said simply. "Of this."
Of you.
Of how easy it is to forget why I built all the distance when you're sitting right there. I'm terrified of wanting to trust you and being wrong." "You're not wrong," he said. "I know you have no reason to believe that yet, but you're not wrong." She looked at him for a long, long moment, long enough that the city outside got perceptibly lighter, long enough that the silence shifted from something held to something chosen. Then she said, "When this is really over, when I know Jae-won is safe and everything is stable, I want to hear all of it. Everything you should have told me 7 years ago." "You'll have it," he said. "All of it. And I want you to tell him."
A breath.
"I want you to tell Jae-won who you are. When I decide it's time." Something in his face broke open, just briefly, just at the edges, and then steadied.
Thank you, he said.
She pulled the blanket around her and looked back at the window.
Don't thank me, she said.
Thank the cat. He looked at her.
The one he was following, she said.
The night you found him. That cat changed everything. He almost smiled.
She saw it, did not remark on it.
But she also did not move away from the warm proximity of the chair across from him, and when Jaewon patted in 20 minutes later, sleepy and looking for both of them, and found them sitting in the early morning light, not quite touching but not far from it, he climbed into his mother's lap and looked at Woo Jin and said, "You stayed." "I stayed," Woo Jin said. Jaewon nodded, satisfied, as if something had been confirmed.
"Good," he said.
"I told Mama you would." Halen looked at her son, then at Woo Jin. Something moved in her face that she no longer quite had the energy to armor back up. "He has opinions about everything," she said. "He's right about this one," Woo Jin said. "What love looks like when it's chosen." The weeks that followed were the quietest and most dangerous weeks of Halen's life, and the danger was not from Han Song-il. It was from the ordinary accumulation of moments. The Saturday parks that had expanded to Sunday breakfasts. The way Jaewon now ran to the door when he heard Woo Jin arrive, that full-body 6-year-old enthusiasm deployed without calculation or protection because children love before they learn to be careful about it. The way Woo Jin had learned, without being told, which questions made Jaewon light up and which ones tired him out, and calibrated accordingly. The dog that had appeared one Saturday, medium-sized, mellow, with excellent manners, which Woo Jin had described as having needed a home, and which Jaewon had named Admiral Park, and which lived at Halen's rebuilt apartment now because of course it did. The rebuilt apartment. The one she'd returned to after Han's operation collapsed, which had new floors and new windows and significantly improved structural integrity that the building management had described as part of a complex-wide upgrade program she'd received suspiciously no notice of. She had called Woo Jin about it. The building needed upgrades, he said. The whole building? Infrastructure ages. Woo Jin. You and Jaewon live there. She had hung up, but she had also kept the floors. The night everything shifted was a Thursday in late autumn. Jaewon was at a school overnight, and Halen was working late at the community center when her colleague from the after-school program knocked on the office door to say there was someone asking for her at the front desk. It was David Asante. He had brought dinner, takeout, thoughtful, her usual order, and he sat across from her in the courtyard with the easy companionship she'd always liked about him, and he said, carefully and kindly, that he wanted to say something and then he wouldn't bring it up again. "You're already gone," he said. She looked at him. "You have been for a while. Maybe before I even started bringing lunch." He smiled, and it was genuinely warm, entirely without bitterness. "The way you are when he's in the building. Something in you realigns, Halen. I've been watching it happen for weeks. I thought it was just history. I don't think it's just history." She looked at the table for a moment. "I'm scared of him," she admitted. "Of what happens if I let him back in and it goes wrong." "What happens if you don't let him back in?" David asked. She didn't answer. He nodded, as if that was answer enough. "He's clearly not going anywhere," David said. "The man renovated your building. That's either very unhinged or very serious, and I think you know which one it is." He stood, collected his jacket. "You deserve someone who stays, Halen. Whatever you decide, you deserve that." He left. She sat in the courtyard for a long time after. Then she picked up her phone. He arrived 20 minutes after she texted, which meant he had probably been nearby, which she chose not to examine too closely. He sat across from her in the empty community center courtyard, and the autumn air was cold, and the courtyard lights were warm, and she looked at him, really looked at him, without the armor, without the maintenance of careful distance, and said, "I'm not going to keep doing this. The halfway thing. I'm either in or I'm out, and if I'm in, I need you to understand what that means." He held her gaze without moving. "It means Jaewon comes first. Always. Before the empire, before whatever crisis, before your pride. If something ever comes down to him or anything else, there is no choice." "There's no choice," he agreed. "It means we tell him the truth. On my timeline. When I say he's ready. On your timeline. It means if you ever make me feel disposable again, the way you did 7 years ago. Halen. His voice was very quiet and very certain. Look at me. She looked. I let you walk away once because I told myself it was for your safety. I was wrong. Not about the danger, about the method. I should have found another way. I should have fought differently. His jaw tightened slightly. I spent 7 years building an empire. I should have spent them building something worth more than an empire. I know that now. And I am not asking you to trust that in words. I'm asking you to watch it in action. Every day. For as long as it takes. The courtyard was very quiet. Then Halen said, very softly, you renovated my building. The infrastructure. You put flower hardware on my front door because J1 would think it was pretty. He said nothing. You learned Yoruba badly so that Mr. Adeyemi at the workshop would laugh and feel comfortable. My pronunciation is improving. You show up to every Saturday with something he's mentioned once in passing. Last week he said he was interested in astronomy, and you showed up with a star chart and spent 3 hours on a blanket teaching him constellations. Her voice had gone somewhere unsteady. You slept on the grass. You had grass stains on that coat that probably costs more than my monthly rent. The coat is replaceable, he said. She stood. He stood. They were 3 feet apart, and then 2, and then she stepped forward and he was entirely still. The stillness of a man who will not move first, who understands that this has to be her choice, who has enough discipline to hold himself at absolute stillness while everything in him reaches toward her, and she reached up and put her hand against his jaw. His eyes closed. Just for a moment. Just one unguarded, uncontrolled moment, his face pressing the smallest fraction into her palm. J1 needs to know, she said. Tell me when, he said. Next Saturday, she said. I'll tell him next Saturday. He opened his eyes. The look in them was not the cold, controlled, dangerous stillness that the world knew. It was something older and quieter and entirely undefended, and it made her breath catch in a way she'd stopped fighting somewhere around the star chart on the grass. He brought his hand up and covered hers where it rested against his jaw, and held it there, just held it, warm and careful and present, and the world outside the community center courtyard continued its business, but in here, something immense and 7 years in the making finally, quietly, settled into place. She didn't move away. Neither did he. And that was everything for now. The following Saturday, on a blanket in Han River Park with Admiral Park stretched across everyone's feet and the autumn sky going gold above them, Halen looked at her son and said, Baby, there's something I need to tell you about your dad. J1 looked up from his star chart. She looked at Woo Jin, who sat beside her. Not behind her, not apart, beside her. He looked back at her with absolute steadiness. I'm here. Go ahead. You know how I told you your dad didn't know about you? She said. J1 nodded, very serious now, the way he got when he understood something important was happening. He knows now, she said. He's been getting to know you. Over these past weeks. J1 looked at her for a very long moment. Then he looked at Woo Jin. The silence stretched for 4 seconds, 5, 6. Then J1 turned to Woo Jin with those ancient, familiar eyes and said, with the directness of a child who had been waiting for this information his entire life. Are you my dad? Woo Jin held the boy's gaze without flinching. Yes, he said. I am. J1 looked at him. Then he looked at the star chart. Then he looked back at Woo Jin. Okay, he said. Then you should know that General Kim had ducklings, and I'm the one who found them first. So you have to come see them. And he went back to the star chart. Halen pressed her hand over her mouth. Woo Jin looked at her with wet eyes he absolutely was not going to acknowledge, and she reached over without ceremony and took his hand, and he held it with the grip of a man holding something he has been waiting for longer than he can say. Admiral Park rearranged himself comfortably across all their laps. What stays? 1 year later. The I'm family residence in Yongsan, renovated now, warmer than it had ever been in 3 generations of occupancy, because Halen had opinions about light fixtures and J1 had been permitted to choose the color of his room, which was now a cheerful disaster of deep teal, was full of noise on a Sunday morning. Jaewon was 7.5 and had announced that the half was still important. He was in the garden with Admiral Park and a new friend from his school, conducting what appeared to be a scientific experiment involving the pond and a collection of rocks, while Woojin's household staff observed with carefully maintained neutrality. In the kitchen, Halen was making jollof rice for dinner, the smell of it already beginning to move through the house, the particular warm richness of it that had made Woojin stop and stand in the kitchen doorway for a long moment the first time she'd made it here, something in his face so unguarded she'd handed him a spoon without comment. He came in now, behind her, and the ring on her left hand caught the morning light. It had been there for 4 months, since a night on a balcony overlooking the Han River when he had not knelt so much as turned to her and said, with Woojin's characteristic directness, "Marry me." Not because of Jaewon. Because I have been in love with you since I was 27 years old, and I have never once stopped, and I refuse to waste another year of my life being at a distance from you. She had said yes. Then she had said he needed to work on his proposal speeches. Then she had said yes again. He came up behind her now and stood close, not touching, just present, the warmth of him at her back, and looked over her shoulder at the pot. "It needs more time," she said. "I know." He put his hands on her shoulders.
Easy.
Sure of himself in this space the way he was sure of himself in every space, except this one felt different, earned rather than assumed. "Jaewon is going to fall in that pond," she said. "Minho is watching." Minho is 30 feet away talking to the new security detail. The new security detail is also watching.
She turned,
looked up at him. The morning light was good to both of them, and his eyes, dark and still and no longer cold, not around her, not anymore, were doing the thing where they moved across her face like she was something that required cataloging, like he was still, after all this time, mildly astonished that she was here. "I have news," she said. Something in his expression shifted, a question without words. She held his gaze. "The clinic called on Thursday," she said. "I've been trying to find the right moment." He went entirely still. "Halen." 7 weeks, she said. The stillness broke. He pulled her forward with one hand at the back of her neck and pressed his forehead to hers and stood there, just stood there, breathing, and she could feel the enormous careful containment of a man who felt things on a scale he had spent his whole life learning to manage, coming very quietly undone at the edges. "Halen," he said again.
Softer.
"I know," she said. "Are you?" "I'm terrified and happy," she said. In that order. Sometimes reverse. He pulled back just far enough to look at her. Then he kissed her, the kind of kiss that had nothing to do with heat, though it was warm, the kind that is simply a man saying you and us, and this without the inadequacy of words. And she kissed him back, her hands on his chest, the ring on her left hand glinting in the kitchen light. From the garden, Jaewon's voice carried through the window. Admiral Park went in the pond. They broke apart, looked at each other. Woojin was already moving toward the door, shrugging off his jacket that cost more than the pond was worth, already calling out to his son in the voice that was nothing like the voice his enemies heard, warm and firm and completely unguarded. Halen stood in the kitchen and listened to the commotion and the splashing and Jaewon's delighted laughter and Woojin's voice threading through all of it, and she put one hand briefly against her stomach, and then she went back to her jollof rice. Because this was the life. Not the fairy tale. The actual, specific, imperfect, miraculous life. With a dog in a pond and a boy who named Ducks and a man who had taken 7 years and an accidental alley collision and one rain-soaked night to find his way back to where he should have been all along.
She turned up the heat on the rice.
Outside, the splashing continued. Inside, something that had been broken for 7 years was whole. Thank you for watching with Afrokorea TV. Drop in the comments, did you cry at the park scene or the kitchen scene? It's okay, we know. Like this story if you want more Korean African romance content. Share with a friend who needs a good love story. Today subscribe to Afrokorea TV so you never miss a new story. Next story coming soon, and it's going to be even more dangerous, even more romantic, and completely unforgettable.